Okay, thank you for your patience. And because it's 3 p.m., it said 3:05 and we're actually behind, so I'm gonna try and space it quite quickly. But I'll start with a joke because I need to wake you all up because it's late afternoon, you've had lunch, you haven't had enough coffee, and there's a panel after this and we need to be all a little bit more excited. So, the joke is, does anybody know why I'm wearing this? No? Okay. It's because I was told that to come and give a talk about project controls, I needed to have white hair. Case in point. So, and I want to lead you through an emotional journey. I want you to start angry and sad, and I'll get you through hopefully in the end to happy. How about that? And then we can all go into a panel with a smile on our faces. I'm Alan, co-founder and CTO of Mplan, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about a paper that we published at AACE's International Conference last year, but that's maybe 20% of the talk. And the rest is going to be building on top of that. And I want to get you out of here with questions, heckles, and I want you to tell me I'm wrong and why I'm wrong. But also, I'm here to tell you that everybody is wrong always. And we'll get into that in a second. So we did this AI-driven risk analysis talk and paper at AACE last year. But let's set some ground rules, because if we talk about AI, we're going to roll our eyes, because this is like the 5th talk today about AI. And I've got one ground rule. If you can't talk about something in simple terms, you can't explain it well, and it means you don't understand it. So I'm going to try and sound as stupid as I can. And I'm not that smart, but I'm really going to try and sound as stupid as I can. And the reason for that is because if you can explain something to a toddler, and none of us are toddlers in the room, I'm not making that reference, but if you can explain something to a toddler, it is probably easy enough to digest. And actually, I have another couple of ground rules, but one of them is I'm not going to talk about AI for the sake of AI, and I do not mean only ChatGPT as AI. Promises, contracts, and what we're going to do today. So I'm going to lead you through that emotional journey, and I'm going to pay you for your time. I'm going to give you some free stuff at the end. So at least please don't leave. Because that is the very last slide, and you have to stick until the very last slide. Okay, ground rules out of the way. And some memes. Not many, but a few. So let's start talking about projects. We have a problem. So Mplan published in 2022, the last time we did this. We call it the state of project delivery. There's lots of other companies that talk about the state of project delivery, but fundamentally, someone must be doing something wrong somewhere at some point, because the data tells us, and actually, not even the data. If I go up to someone and I say, 9 out of 10 projects end up either late or over budget by some sort of definition, nobody in 7 years of me doing this has looked at me and said, you're an idiot, leave. Everybody's like, yeah, sounds about right. And right is the last word that we should have in this. So at Mplan we started thinking, and we love thinking and talking about things and trying to figure them out, and then eventually get to maybe a small granule of sand about what to do. But we thought about, how do we think about the future in projects specifically, right? So this is kind of how we think about the future in risk analysis. We will take a schedule, which is, let's assume it's okay, right? I'm not going to go into schedule quality. That's another thing. But let's assume that the schedule's okay. That's one representation of one way of how I want to do things in my project. Now, even by the definition of quantum uncertainty, and Leonie's rolling her eyes because she used to work at a quantum computing startup, nothing is predetermined and everything has an enormous amount of variability built in, right? And so we started there and we're like, maybe that's part of the problem, right? If you have 5,000 activities in one schedule, which is still one version, and you just think about how those 5,000 things could go wrong and how they're all connected together and how they're all interdependent, and forget the schedule part of it, right? This is what actually happens on the ground, right? You miss one thing, and if you're in Rail, you end up missing a possession, and that pushes everything 6 months, and then you have a cascade of problems, right? That's how we end up in that situation. And so we started thinking about how can we actually do some more realistic thinking and modeling about the future? How does the future work? So we took this process, which is chaotic, opinion-based, a lot of arguments happen in the middle. At some point, a project director will say, but the deterministic end date needs to get P80 probability, and then it gets completely manipulated, and everybody's a little bit cynical and jaded about schedule risk analysis. And we thought, how can we remove as many opinions as possible and make it based on data, or as much data as possible and as many facts as possible, and how can we scale this up? And those are the two things that drive pretty much everything that we do. So we thought about that long process, and we realized that we can take that process of like, we'll generate all the distribution, right? So right now, if you do a risk analysis in PRA or other products that are available, you'll start thinking like, I'm going to draw my triangles or whatever distribution shape I want, and you're cherry picking whatever distributions you want for everything in a schedule. You do Monte Carlo analysis, and you end up with something at the end that there are arguments. And the whole point about this is that, and this is a quote from someone that I'm not going to name, but they say, we go through a 6-week process. We get to the end of week 6, where we've finished the modeling. Everybody's agreed that this is the risk profile, and everybody's too tired to do anything about it. What's the point, right? So we thought, well, maybe compress all of that to the left and spend your, 4 weeks in this example, spend 3 of them actually remediating the problems rather than just saying, here's a problem. And I think that's a much better way of approaching how do we change the future rather than just say, it's going to go bad. Because like, I think we're all good at coming to a conclusion of this project is going to have several problems. And you can probably say that about almost every project, right? Because that is the nature of the game. So because of this, you're going to have a lot of questions. So I thought I'll get up front, and I'm not even going to tell you, right? We've got the why, but I think like slide 15 or 16 is kind of when we really get to the why. I'm going to start with a how. So how do we do this? And that's basically what's in the paper. We collected a lot of data, a lot of effectively finished projects, finished schedules. And we built some machine learning to tell us when it's going to end. The data set is right now, and that count changes every time because we keep getting new ones and we keep updating the data set and processing it in new ways. But roughly think about it in this way. If I took anyone with even 0 project experience and I did the Clockwork Orange thing with toothpicks on their eyes, and I forced them to look at 2.5 million years of project data, they'd be pretty good at forecasting, wouldn't they? So even with machine learning that has 1/10 of the capacity of a human brain or less, it's probably going to be okay. And that's kind of what we talk about in the paper, and you can download the paper and look at the slides from that presentation if you're interested, especially in like the accuracy that we've measured compared to other modeling methods. But the reality is that then the machine learning is only one part, right? That's how you get to one scenario. So then we need to start thinking about how do I connect everything together? What can I do? So a lot of it is then going back to actionability, right? And then we're like, well, we have all this data. Maybe we can actually build some generative models. And this is the second part that's not in the paper from last year, but also where I'm also going to give you some stuff for free. So, challenges. I'm pretty sure that right now, there's at least a few people in the room thinking about, here's all the ways that it could break down or not work, or here's all the problems that you're going to encounter along the road. And we talk about these in the paper. First one is trust, right? Do we believe that AI works? And we've seen, we've been doing it for 7 years. That's basically the core of what we've been selling. The paper shows a simplified version that you can basically bake at home. You don't need our software in some ways. But how do you get to a point where you trust it? And it's not just about accuracy measurement. It's stakeholder management. It's convincing the person who used ChatGPT once and it gave them an answer that they didn't like, so therefore all AI is doomed, and all these things. Then you have unintuitive results. It's the same as QSRA, right? Because we end up with results that have probability distributions on everything, and then you end up talking about like what is the different critical paths that could materialize. It gets very technical very quickly, and it basically self-fulfills into getting ignored in the decision-making process because it's just too complex to digest quickly. So how do we build on top of these tools to get to answers that get project directors, project managers, leadership to actually make decisions on the back of it? And this is kind of the problem, right? But like we try and simplify the visualization. This is actually a 4,000 line schedule that we've simplified down. But really, if I told you like what's going to be the critical path when we finish this project in 4 years, because that's really what you care about. It's not the planned critical path. It's what the actualized critical path was if we're talking about schedules. I don't know. Anybody who claims they know is actually probably going to be wrong. And so the only option that we have is to abandon this notion of certainty, right? And when I see statements that usually come from government, leadership, things like that, where like, this rail project will be ready by the 31st of October, 2036, or whatever it is, I'm making no reference to, it's all, what's the saying in films and books, right? It's purely casual, purely coincidental. But the idea is that in itself is an opinion, but you can't actually say that that's ever going to be true unless you get to that point and then you measure, was it true or not? And so we try and basically pump as much compute as possible into this way of thinking. And that's really where then it becomes scalable. So if you have AI-driven risk analysis, where do you go, right? So let's talk about 3 ways that AI can help. And I'm talking about project delivery, but really it can help. Those are the 3 ways that you can help anything, right? You can do it faster, you can do it more times, or you can do it with more accuracy. And there's not really any other ways to scale up what you do. So, oops, clicker, there we go. Now let's think about scaling up. So if we think about, please give me some poetic license, this is an oversimplified, terrible slide, it's an oversimplified process of what we go through every month, sometimes, every 6 months, who knows. But we have risk assessment, then we create some scenarios, then we try and change the project, then we update the schedule in some way, which actually reflects the changes that we've made into change orders or however you do that, and then some documentation or reporting happens, right? And that loop happens, if you're lucky, every month. If you're not so lucky, every 6 months. And I want you to actually do this. Close your eyes, think about that cycle, and think about what does it look and feel like if you can do that cycle 1,000 times an hour. What does that let you do? Because this is really how we end up scaling up risk analysis and project management. So the slide version of that is actually terrible, right? But really, this is where we end up. So what we actually are talking about is infinitely scalable and immediately updated, right? We're talking about a minute, 10 minutes max. What does that do? First of all, we start with, it's no longer a forecast, it's a projection. We treat it as a projection. It's a slightly different word. But if I tell you something is a forecast, you're expecting that to be what I think the outcome is going to be. End of statement. If it's a projection, it's what the outcome is going to be based on the conditions I have now. And that changes the game because you can have as many projections as you want, and then they'd be completely different, right? A forecast is more what an oracle, not the software company, does on the mountain when they're like saying, this is what's going to happen in 10 years. And the projection gives you space to make change. And that's what we're all about, I hope. If we know that something is, running towards the proverbial cliff, you might want to turn the steering wheel at some point, or hit the brakes, or both. So, we're talking about AI. Everybody in AI is talking about agents, and how does that enter into it? I thought I'd do a little thing about agents, because we're going to have agents in the panel later. So I thought I'd throw a little bit of a curveball. But agents are things, I'm going to just call them things. I'm not going to use a more specific word, simple words, that have agency, right? It's in the name itself. An agency means that it can decide to go pick some data, go call some tools, go do some things, right? And I'm going to leave it arbitrarily and deliberately vague. Why? Because I don't want you to build your own. And this is the interesting, if you take anything away, take this away from today, because agents are moving at a speed that even AI companies are struggling to keep up with, right? Even OpenAI itself has to keep up with Google and DeepSeek, and there's this Mexican standoff of everybody doing a release 1 week after the other because everybody's racing to get to those releases. And even Weird plans struggle to keep up with the pace of how things are going. So it's kind of like rolling your own ends up being a self-defeating position of not gaining from the advantages that come later. And I thought I'd throw this in. If I had a bigger font, I would have used it. So, how should AI feel, right? Because we talked about that loop, but really, do we actually want to be in the lever room pulling all the levers? Or do we want to proverbially put the crayons down and actually spend our time thinking, right? So if we're managing a project, we're not really being paid for our ability to pick a triangle distribution versus a beta distribution. In a sense, that is a waste of time compared to our ability to know what to do about things and how to fix it if it's broken, or capture opportunity if there is some. And really, it should just feel like this, right? Imagine you have a colleague, and the colleague's called Barry, and you send them a message on WhatsApp. Hey, dude, I just need this stuff. Can you go pull things out of MPlan and give me some ideas of, and in this case, it's a very simple analysis, but you could go further, right? And the better agents get, the less defined and the more aggressive you can become with the ideas. And then you get a response. It's a little bit, hey, that's a bit too much for WhatsApp, right? I might read it later. Dump it in an email for me. Okay, bye. And that's how it should feel, right? This is what, apart from that very long response, which is not realistic, that's how talking to a colleague should feel. And I think this is how AI should feel. And this is where agents really enable this way of operating. Obligatory plug for our platform, because, well, otherwise I wouldn't be here. What do we do, right? We published that paper last year about AI SRA. We have a lot of tools and a platform built effectively around that and our data set and our models. It looks a little bit confusing, but I want to try and walk you through it in a very, very simple way. So underneath everything, forecasting, machine learning, schedules, and some other data. It's not necessarily, it's not just schedules, like risk registers, standards, etc. Number of products, and then Barry is actually the name of our agent. What you saw from the WhatsApp screenshots is not fake, it's literally from my phone. And then there's some free stuff, but there'll be more free stuff at the end as well. So let's start with, I'm going to press a button and run the AACE array. Effectively, if you had a magic box where you could just throw in your schedule, any documentation that you have, your risk registers, and get out 2 steps in that loop, this is what that product is. We call it Insights. It's, you know, we're not great at naming things, but and as you'll see later, we're very bad at naming things. But the idea is, can you run the AACE array as fast as possible, as many times as possible, and think in scenarios, not in triangle distributions? Next step is, well, we spend a lot of time reporting. Who spends more than 10% of their work time writing some sort of report to, I don't know, governance manager? Nobody? Wrong crowd? There we go. What if you had all that information in some place and you know what the report needs to look like? Just describe what the report needs to look like, and so that information can be assembled. And then every month, you don't actually need to do anything. You just download the new version of the report because it auto updates from all the data. Press button, receive report. That's kind of the principle, like just press a button, right? As much as possible, because if you press a button and you receive the thing, then all the time that you haven't spent maneuvering levers is time that you can spend thinking and deciding, which is the important thing that the humans do. What about PMOs, right? If I can do it thousands of times and with thousands of variants for one project, I can actually do it for all of them. It doesn't cost me more to scale it horizontally to everything that I'm doing. If you've only got one project, then, well, no. But if you've got multiple projects, if you have a portfolio, and this is where I'm getting, so the previous product was called Auto Report, unimaginative naming. This product is called, do you want to guess? Portfolio. But can you aggregate it all and find some horizontal things? And like, you know, think about how do the projects affect each other and how's the uncertainty here affect the project over there? Last one. What about schedules, right? Everything that we do in risk analysis now is based on that one static schedule. If we're lucky, we get to do what sometimes we call risk by exclusion, right? Oh, what if I mitigate this thing? What if I mitigate that thing? And that's one of the things that we automate a lot in Insights, is like help people decide what scenarios they want to look like and compare them to each other. But really, a scenario might mean if I'm building a bridge and it has a toll plaza on one end, what if I build the toll plaza concurrently to the rest of the bridge? That's not a risk scenario. It's an execution scenario, but it's an option. And that's the important thing, is that we're thinking about all the options of how can we do this so we can deliver our project faster with less risk, whatever our targets end up being. So actually don't press the button, right? Remember, we've got Barry, just ask it to do things. And so pressing the button might actually just mean type it or give it a phone call. I'm actually very proud of the fact that we had it's not 1-800 Barry, but it's close enough as a phone number 6 months before OpenAI did. And that's apex of my career, and then everything's been downhill since. Okay, now FOMO, right? Because I've told you what we do, how we use it, how the AACE array works. Who's using it? Is there any users in the room? Good. I want to see the FOMO faces. So, TRU, Transparent Route Upgrade. If you don't know what the Transparent Route Upgrade is, actually the second largest rail program in the country. It's, I don't know, estimate keeps changing, right? And we talk about cost estimation. That actually just keeps changing, but it's, let's say 11 digits for simplification. Low 11 digits, we're talking about like 10, 15 billion. And it's an upgrade program in the northeast of England on the Transpennine route. That's why it's called the Transpennine route upgrade, unimaginatively, so I'm not the only one that's bad at naming things. They did, in 6 months, 80 full risk analysis. They took 6,000 actions out of M-Plan Insights and made a bunch of changes, basically cutting off 3.5 years of tail from the projection. So that means that the projection that they had when we first started with them was 3.5 years longer than what they got by the end of it. And 3.5 years, quote from, it's not even here, but quote from Rich Halchinski, the chief of staff at TRU, was that they spend £2 million a day if it's late. That's good return on investment if you ask me. Maybe we're not charging them enough. And they did it by following the AI schedule risk analysis, quite literally to the letter. And we helped them do this, but we actually gave a joint talk about a number of times. There's a webinar. But let's look at some others, right? So Anglian Water right now have 1,400 projects in their portfolio. Well, in portfolio, from their portfolio in portfolio. And they've estimated that there was about 12 million of delay costs that was cut out just by looking at how one single thing, which is something to do with showers, this is how trivial it gets, but was across all projects, and just by moving that thing around seems to have saved them 12 million. Their words, not mine. And that's the important thing. Like, no case studies that we do have any estimates from us. SCS, which is part of High Speed 2, it's one of the joint ventures. It's the one that gets the most press because it's part of the tunneling to get to Euston, which may or may not, or maybe sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't. If you're talking about quantum uncertainty, that is kind of in a superimposed state of it's going to happen, but it's also not going to happen, but it's also going to happen. Again, other numbers, not ours, theirs. Network Rail, similar thing, 6-month pilot on the Great Western Main Line. Funnily enough, I was delayed by about an hour and a half today on that. So there are some things that we can't fix. But others, which is not missing some possessions, are pretty important. Last one, because it's not all about rail, there's a big LNG project in northern Canada that cannot be named because their lawyers won't let us. But it's Googleable. I didn't tell you. And no, it's not Trans Mountain because that one is doomed, but for political reasons. And when it's politics, you can't forecast it. I'm sorry. So let's reduce the FOMO now, right? We got FOMO. Like, everybody's using it. Everybody's doing something with AI. And actually, what I want you to think about is it's not really about our platform or our products. It's just think about what you can do as part of your journey, right? And it might involve M-Plan, it might not, right? Depending on your role, depending on what you do. And really, there's a lot of stuff that you can try now, right? And this is the biggest problem in adopting AI right now, which is it doesn't matter. Think of it. If you find one thing that didn't work, it doesn't mean the whole thing doesn't work. In the same way that if you're wrong once, it doesn't mean you're always wrong. And there's a lot of getting hung up on hallucinations, etc. And reality is you're kind of still responsible for your own work, right? And if you keep that in principle in mind, you're not just gonna, and this happens a lot on LinkedIn, but because there's no consequence, right? But you're not just gonna copy paste straight out of GPT and send it in a report to your manager, right? You're gonna read it and you're gonna do some editing. But actually, maybe it saved you still an hour, 2 hours, whatever, right? And I can guarantee that, and I mean competitors and peers in the loosest way possible, whether it's organizations or people that are gonna interview or compete with you for your next role. Right? And there's a lot of free stuff. I love that AI agents list because it's someone that maintains an enormous list of like all sorts of agents that do things. So whatever you need to do, you can just go and search on that. Maybe there is an agent, and it'll save you a bunch of time. I promise you some free stuff. And I should have probably used another meme here, but I didn't have the time to think about it. Yeah? So, first of all, we talked about schedule integrity. If you're paying for Acumen Fuse, stop now. Just do that for free. We've released a tool because schedule integrity matters to be able to forecast correctly. And we have to care about schedule integrity, so take that for free. I'll put some, there's some those QR codes will come back at the end. Second, Schedule Studio. Press button, receive schedule basically means that instead of using P6 to draw everything, we can go from natural language plus documentation to a schedule, and we can edit that schedule using natural language. So imagine, and this is one of the things that gets talked a lot about in planning, is what you're being paid for is not your ability, if you're a planner, to use certain functions in P6. What you're being paid for, what you're being paid for is your knowledge of what needs to be done when, right? So what if we compress all that schedule editing into something that is semi-automated and you actually spend more time actually planning? What if you could come up with 20 versions of the schedule and you pick the one that you like the most? Wouldn't that be amazing? It's not something that you're going to do manually unless you have an army of planners with P6. And so that's what we're going for. And what we're doing is you can get it for free until the end of June and then 50% off. So we're doing a soft launch effectively, and founding members that join the open beta, the only currency that we're asking for is bug reports and quality reports. And also some license in terms of, if you generate a schedule and you didn't like what it looks like, send us a report, like email us, just tell us like, I didn't like this. And so we can actually make it better. That's the only currency that we're asking for. We're asking for until the end of June. Yeah, so what's next? A lot of things, but effectively, if you're gonna take anything away from this slide is, it's not gonna slow down, it's just gonna keep going faster and faster and faster. Not just for us, but for all the different AI platforms that exist. Think about like how many models have been released up until this point just in 2025, right? And it's more than the second half of 2024. So we're kind of still in that acceleration phase. I post a lot of infuriating stuff. If you want to wake up in the morning and see some memes about projects and AI, this is a very shameless plug to get some more followers, but thank you for those actually scanning the code. And here's the free things. So we have free trials. You can sign up for the beta for Schedule Studio, or you can get free schedule integrity. We don't actually store the schedule, so once you download the PDF and you close the window, it's lost forever, so you just have to upload it again. But a lot of people get a little bit sensitive about what are you doing with the data. We don't actually keep it. Thank you. One question. I was hoping there would be no time for questions because I don't. No, I'm joking. Yeah?
Schedules in your database, which is quite impressive. Could you share how you manage data?
Yeah. Lie, cheat, and steal. No, I'm joking. So the question was, how did you actually collect so many schedules? The reality is, for many clients, not all of them, there are some national security kind of things where we can't do this, but for most of our clients, one of the contributions at the beginning is their historical schedules. And so it'll be, what have you done? How have you done it? The reason why we do that is because for every client, we fine tune a model that is specific to them. So, you know, if you're random names. If you're Balfour Beatty, the way that you build a bridge is different to the way that Ferrovial builds it. And actually, that is significant information that makes the forecasting better. But also, there's information there that helps just make the foundation model better. So, and I guess like an important follow-up here is that no data actually ends up in the product. It's only the model. But that's basically how we've collected the data. So it's not openly available data. It's actually data that's under NDAs and lots of different, I guess, clauses. Cool.
Just another question from me again. You're specialized in infrastructure projects, right? What type of projects?
We've got a little bit of everything. The case studies here were a little bit more towards the infrastructure side, but it's actually this vertical construction. There's a case study for our children's hospital where we accelerated it by 6 months. There's engineering projects. We kind of draw the line just before manufacturing. So basically like it stops at shipbuilding. And then beyond that, when it becomes repetitive, so manufacturing is repetitive, actually the way you do risk and you do uncertainty is different.